Jean Hegarty, and I am this older sister, the eldest of a family of 5. My maiden name's McElhenney, and my younger brother Kevin, who was the middle child in the family, died on Bloody Sunday, age 17. I didn't live in Derry at the time. Actually, I emigrated to Canada in 1968 as, you know, I don't think we used the term back then, but basically an economic migrant. And I heard the news of Bloody Sunday in Canada. However, what I heard on the news was that they killed gunmen and bombers. You know, the 6 o'clock news maybe said there was 5 dead. The 9 o'clock news, the number was up, and then by 11 o'clock in the evening, the number was up. My first reaction was, oh God, that's Derry. But only that it was Derry. And then it was kind of, as opposed to my shame, a bit nonchalant because I didn't know any gunmen and bombers. There was a good sized Derry community in Toronto, you know, so there was phone calls back and forth, but everybody was not relaxed, but nobody was super excited or anything. I mean, it was a terrible atrocity, but nobody knew anybody, and nobody was getting any news from home anyway. So, I mean, I went to bed and slept well, unconcerned, and then very early in the morning, about 6 o'clock in the morning, I had a phone call, you know, and for you guys it's a little different, but when you're in Canada or North America and your family's all here, you know, if the phone rings either late at night or early in the morning, you immediately think. It was my aunt. She never phoned me. And anyways, for some reason, I have absolutely no idea. She said, Jean, I have some really bad news. And I said, it's Kevin. I don't know why, you know. Now, my other brother wasn't in Derry. He was living in England. So anyways, and that was the news. And I can't tell you the confusion that was going on in my head, because it was Kevin. And he was 14 when I left home. And he was a gunman and a bomber. You know, I just couldn't reconcile this. And my trip home, well, first of all, the reason they didn't phone me Sunday night was my husband and I bought our first house in December of 71. And when I was talking to my mother at Christmas, my parents didn't have a phone in the house, and they would have gone to neighbours for me to phone at Christmas. When I was talking to my mother at Christmas, of course, I was crying poverty. Every cent I had got on a down payment, and I didn't know when I was ever going to be home and all this. So my mother kept telling them not to phone me because I couldn't afford to come home. Thankfully, I worked for a German company who did freight forwarding, but we also had a travel agency. So when I called work in the morning, I mean, when I talked to them, I didn't tell them I was coming home because I really thought I couldn't. Anyways, when I called work to say what was going on, my boss just said, come down to the office, pick up a ticket, and we'll sort the whole thing out later. So that was the only way I was able to travel home. The whole flight home was like a blur. And I'm still, back in those days, you believed the newspapers. You believed what you heard on the television. You never for a minute doubted that what you were hearing on television was not the truth, or that there was a spin put on it. Coming through, I had to change planes in Glasgow, and coming through the airport, there was all these pictures, and there was a picture of Kevin with on all of these newspapers. And that was a bit traumatic. Anyways, I got home, and the whole funeral thing is a bit of a blur for me. And I went back to Canada, and to my shame now, it's not something I continually beat myself up about, but you know, I never really appreciated the trauma for my parents and my other 2 sisters who were remaining at home. I really didn't, and I should have, because I had a 3-year-old child. You know, something should have clicked in there about what it would be, but I didn't. I always phoned my mum on Kevin's birthday and always phoned on the anniversary and all that kind of stuff. But the family never talked about Kevin. You know, when I would come home on holidays, as much as my mother ever said to me when I'd be here on holidays was, the day before I was leaving, have you been up to the cemetery? You know, it wasn't a subject that we talked about a lot. Anyways, I suppose my awakening about things political and stuff like that was Canadian forces were in Somalia in I think in the late 80s. They came back as superheroes, absolute superheroes, but about 3 or 4 years later, it started coming out. They were absolute bastards. Well, I suppose not all of them, but some of them. So some of the atrocities that the Canadian troops did when they were away started coming out. And there was this realization, things are not always, but that was the first time that, for me, that I began to doubt things that you hear and read, you know, see and read. Anyways, then we returned here in 1995, and the Bloody Sunday Justice campaign had started in the very early, probably about 1919. John Kelly, who works here, would have been very instrumental in that. And they'd achieved a good deal. So I started going to meetings and became involved. And part of that was, you know, on the ground, I never knew where Kevin died. He died in the bogside, but I never knew where he died. Physically on his body, I never knew where the bullet wound was. It was something that I didn't know or anything like that. So, and finally, when the Savile inquiry was announced, it was a huge learning thing for me, because I began to find out. And when I came back and I would ask questions, you didn't really get answers, you know, because most people in Derry, not everybody, most people in Derry were here. So when you asked the questions, well, sure, everybody knows what happened. That was a stock answer that I got. Sure, everybody knows what happened. I don't know what happened. But anyways, so working for the Bloody Sunday Trust, I was able to, because the inquiry was taking place in the Guildhall, and we actually had a live feed in this building. So I could actually work and hear all the evidence and that. And for me, that was a big thing, because it was a big learning experience. You know, physically, they found out that he died trying to get to the door of the flats, that he was shot in the buttocks and came right up through his body. So there was absolutely no doubt that he was crawling away from the soldier who killed him, posing no threat again, like is the case for most of them. So that's my story. The day that we got the report, for me, was a great day. I don't particularly care, well, that's not true. If there's evidence, I think the evidence should be followed. It shouldn't be ignored. It was ignored at the time. My problem with what's going on now, there's a murder inquiry going on now, is they didn't gather any evidence on the day. And I don't know what I feel about the soldier. The soldier, I sort of went through my life kind of thinking that the soldier who killed Kevin was anywhere from 18 to 35 and anywhere from shit scared to a psychopath. But you know, how do you know? How do you know what you would do? So I don't have any huge desire for revenge on the soldier. Now, if you're talking to John, who's here, if you ever come back and you're talking to John, John's is different. He really feels the soldier had a choice and made his choice and that. So, my personal bugbear about Bloody Sunday would be a guy called General, he retired from the army a couple of years ago, General Sir Michael Jackson. He was an adjutant to Colonel Wolford on the day of Bloody Sunday. And he's the person who developed this, what has come to be known as the shot list, that said that they killed gunmen and bombers. So a soldier standing there with a gun killed Kevin, and I can't begin to imagine what was going through his head. Who knows, good, bad, or whatever. But Jackson very deliberately assassinated Kevin's character. And for that, I'd like to see him hang, not literally, but that's never going to happen. And I've reconciled myself to that a long time. He grew much too fast up through the ranks of the army, and that's never going to happen. So I'd like to see that happen. I can always hope, but other than that, it won't happen. Now, there was one thing that I think was, in a way, kind of a blessing for me. It's like I don't know. When I was on the plane coming back, I was only 23, sorry. I was 23 years of age and I had a 3-year-old child. But I sat on the plane from Toronto to Glasgow plotting to kill the soldier. I have no idea how I wasn't detailed, but whatever it took in my life, I was going to do that. And in the church, if you see film footage of the church and all that, we had to have passes to get into the church, and it was a huge funeral because there was one funeral. I'm the eldest child in the family, and I was at one end and my mother was at the other end, and my brothers and sisters were in between. But I went to look and see how my mother was doing, but actually my father was in the way, because he was kind of kneeling forward. And I just I'm not overly religious or even spiritual, but I just looked at my father and I thought, I couldn't do that to another man. And my father, the word I always use, and the word that comes to my mind, was beaten. Everything about my father was not the man I knew that was kneeling there in that church. And in a way, revenge left me, thankfully. So that was only like a split second thing, but I'm eternally grateful for it. And actually, it didn't even take me long to realise that was a special second, and it was, and I'm grateful. I was grateful, while I didn't think too much about my parents and didn't give them enough consideration and all that kind of stuff. I was always grateful for that minute, second, whatever it was, because first of all, I'd never been able to find out which soldier it was or anything like that. But the second thing, how was I ever going to do it? The second thing was, that soldier had a family. And strangely, it was my father more than my mother, because all the emphasis was kind of on the mothers, and there wasn't a lot of emphasis on the dads and that. So, but we didn't only lose our brother on that day. We lost our parents too. They were different people, and they weren't really parents after that, So, I'll answer any questions you have.
So I was walking down the streets and observing everything, and I'm trying to sympathize and whatever, but I don't know, when you came back, is there any way you can explain to me what the air, the surroundings felt around you during that time?
When I came back?
Yeah.
Oh, when I came back?
Yeah.
Surreal is the only word. I mean, the whole city, I think, was in a state of shock. I mean, and I don't know if I stayed a week or two, but the whole period between the Sunday and the funerals was just, I think everybody in this town were walking around like zombies.
So it's been rather quiet.
Oh yes, yeah. I mean, nearly all the stores were closed and everything. And my brother and I decided that we would sort of to represent the family, go and visit the other wakes. What wakes are, that we have the funeral thing in the house as opposed to in the funeral parlour and that. And we went right, and there was queues queues and queues and queues to get into the buildings. You know, now, we didn't actually have to queue. I don't know, we must have had some kind of a chaperone, I don't know. But, because I do remember the queues, but I also remember that we didn't have to, you know. We were only in for a few minutes and that, but the whole thing's a blur. But I think for the whole city, the whole thing was just surreal for a week anyway, perhaps even longer before things started. You know, lots of people say Bloody Sunday didn't just affect, you know, the Bloody Sunday families. It affected the whole psyche of this city. So, and that is probably true. Now, I would have been away and not really aware of it, but there was always, I remember everything was very quiet and stuff like that, but in truth I don't have a lot of memories other than surreal. I try to search my memory for things about that time, and my only one is seeing Kevin, and it wasn't Kevin. And I think that was probably, did they say coping mechanisms? Yes. Because he was a 14-year-old boy when I left home, and he was a 17-year-old young man. You know, 14 and 17 is quite a difference, but that was also part of the confusion in my head. You know, of course, when I came home, I asked my parents, was he involved in anything, and my parents said, don't be ridiculous. You know, and questions, when I asked questions, that was the stock answer. Then I began, you know, to think, I lied through my teeth to my parents when I was 17 years of age, you know. I'd be going out on a date and I'd tell them everything except that I was going on a date. So I'm thinking, well, maybe if it had been me, I wouldn't have been telling my parents what I was doing and stuff like that. So I had all, and I was only 23, so I wasn't far removed from 17. You know, I could remember 17 quite easily. So it was, and I kept thinking, and all of those things, and then I'd say, well, everybody says he wasn't. And then you'd think, you know I used to lie to my mother. So they used to confuse me in my memories. And I suppose one of the things that I do have some guilt about is that and one of the reasons that I'd be angry at Michael Jackson is that he caused me to doubt Kevin. You know, and I would be angry at him for that he caused me to doubt, and not disown him in any way. If Canadians or friends or work colleagues would ask me about Kevin, because I mean, everybody I worked with, all they heard was they'd killed gunmen and bombers.
Yeah.
And you know, they'd ask me, and I kind of said, well, my parents maintained that he was not, but I'd follow it up with, but I don't know. You know, so I'd be angry at the British government for that part of me that kind of disowned him for, I don't know how the words to rightly describe that are, you know, but that would be one of the things. Now, for a lot of other people, and maybe for my sisters and that here, it was easier because they knew he wasn't, you know, and it wasn't a big difficulty, and didn't damage my life or, you know, anything like that. I think I have emotional scars, but not huge ones, you know. Raised 2 kids and got on with things, but it bothers me that use of media and all that kind of stuff can be used to distort the picture so badly. So, any more questions?
I don't know if there are or not, Jane, but these students invested quite a bit of time in Bloody Sunday and looked over the Saville report, and 2 of them developed projects that are similar. Would you be willing to listen to them tell you about that project a little bit, and maybe
Oh,
we'll
yeah.
make a donation to the museum if you'd take it?
Oh, we'll take any, yes, we'll take, but yes, just before we do that, can I just double check there's no one
Sure.
out here before we